What if I told you the deadliest weapon in human history wasn't, I don't know, a hypersonic missile or a contested border
Right?
or even a fight over dwindling resources? What if the absolute root cause of every major global conflict was essentially, well, a dictionary?
A dictionary. Yeah, that's definitely not what you usually hear on the news.
No,
Okay.
exactly. Because when you watch a massive geopolitical crisis unfolding, the overwhelming urge is to find the villain and the hero. You look at the chaos, the treaties, the shifting borders, and you try to map it onto this, clean grid of good guys and bad guys.
Which almost never works.
Right. But if you're joining us for this deep dive, you're probably not looking for simplistic black and white headlines. You want to understand the deep, hidden gears turning the events of the world, and you want to know why that moral grid keeps breaking.
It breaks because we are often looking at the entirely wrong map. I mean,
Right.
we assume every global player is operating under the same fundamental rules of reality. And that assumption is exactly what we're going to challenge today.
To do that, we're looking at a truly fascinating framework by the author Xiaoyang Lin. We're pulling from two specific texts he wrote, primarily focusing on a piece called 3464, Three Categories of Groups in Today's World Conflicts.
Yeah, and we'll also be pulling in some crucial historical context from his companion text, which is 3463.
Right. And Lin attempts something incredibly ambitious here. He categorizes the root causes of every major conflict on Earth, and his conclusions are just entirely counterintuitive. He argues that the gears of global warfare are driven entirely by a failure of language and cognition.
Before we jump into the mechanics of that, though, it is really vital to establish some ground rules for our discussion.
Definitely.
Because Lin's framework touches on some intensely sensitive concepts. I mean, he analyzes the fundamental nature of religion, he critiques the geopolitical maneuvering of the West, specifically Europe and the U.S., and he dissects the very concept of faith itself.
Which is heavy stuff.
It is. So we want to make it strictly clear to you, the listener, that we are not endorsing or taking sides on any of these political or religious viewpoints. Our goal here is purely analytical.
Yeah, we are impartially unpacking Lin's original theories just to understand the architecture of his unique perspective. We are observing the theory, not adopting it.
Exactly.
So, here's our roadmap. We're going to start by unpacking Lin's fundamental root cause for all human conflict. Then, we are going to look at a rather bizarre ancient legal practice that Lin claims still dictates our modern psychology.
Oh, that part is so interesting.
It really is. And finally, we will break down the world's conflicts into Lin's three distinct categories. So let's start with that dictionary problem.
Let's do it.
Because if you ask 10 historians what causes war, you will probably get 10 different answers. Morality, empire building, resources, ego, whatever.
Right, the usual suspects.
But Lin argues the absolute root cause beneath all of that is a profound failure of communication, which he basically breaks down into three specific levels.
Yeah, and the first level is a literal lack of vocabulary. We simply do not have the precise, nuanced words required to describe the complexities we're arguing about.
Which sounds wild at first.
It does. But think about trying to negotiate a highly complex, multi-generational border dispute when neither side's language actually contains a word for the specific type of shared sovereignty required to solve it.
Wow.
The concepts literally cannot be verbalized.
I mean, I can see that causing friction for sure, but wars being fought over a lack of vocabulary. I'm struggling with this a bit.
Yeah.
Jumping from a linguistic misunderstanding to a full-blown war feels like a massive leap.
It does seem like a stretch.
How does Lin actually connect those dots?
He connects it through the second and third levels of this language failure, which are conflicting logic and a lack of linguistic consensus.
Okay.
It's not just that we don't have the words, it's that the very way two groups define concepts like right, wrong, and justice are structurally incompatible.
Oh, I see.
Like, if your societal logic is built on the premise that divine law dictates borders, and my societal logic is built on the premise that historical military conquest dictates borders, we're processing reality on entirely different operating systems.
So we might both use the translated word for justice at a peace summit, right?
Yeah.
But there is zero consensus on what that word actually means in reality.
Exactly zero.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. It's kind of like two people fiercely arguing over a referee's call, but one is playing basketball and the other is playing chess.
That's a great way to put it.
They are both incredibly passionate. They both think they're playing by the rules, but they literally don't have the shared vocabulary to agree. A foul in basketball means absolutely nothing to a chess player.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. And Lin traces this logical mismatch back through history to explain why human reasoning around conflict is so deeply fractured today.
Right, which brings us to the companion text.
In 3463, he introduces the historical concept of the judicial duel. And this practice is basically the foundational key to understanding his entire worldview on modern geopolitics.
The judicial duel, this blew my mind when I was reading through the source material, but again, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
How does a medieval legal quirk explain modern international relations?
Well, to understand the connection, we have to look at the psychology it created.
Mm-hmm.
If we look at pre-Middle Ages Europe, particularly within Germanic societies after the fall of the Roman Empire, central authority was incredibly weak.
Right, it was kind of a free-for-all.
Basically, there was no unified legal system, no forensic science, no widespread surveillance. So what happens when you have a serious dispute, say a murder accusation or a property dispute,
Okay.
and there are no witnesses, no physical evidence, and the local lord simply cannot figure out who is telling the truth?
Today, the case just gets thrown out for lack of evidence, but back then, they literally fought it out.
They did, but, and this is key, it was not a street brawl. It was a highly formalized, sacred institution. The accuser and the accused would go before a judge or the church. They would swear binding oaths, and then they would engage in physical combat.
Sometimes with swords and shields, right?
Yeah, swords, shields, sometimes even using hired proxy warriors that they couldn't fight themselves.
Yeah.
But the critical element here isn't the violence. The critical element is that the victor wasn't just declared the strongest.
Oh.
The victor was declared legally and morally right.
Which, to a modern mind, just sounds insane, like, I stabbed you, therefore I inherit the farm.
Right.
But Lin points out that there was a flawless, airtight logic to this in the ancient world.
There was. Because they genuinely believed that a higher power was directly intervening in human affairs. They believed the creator of the universe would simply not allow a liar to strike down a truthful man in a sacred duel.
Wow, so the victory was basically empirical evidence of divine judgment.
Exactly. And this brings us to Lin's most crucial philosophical distinction. This is the exact moment he draws the line between animal behavior and human civilization.
Because animals fight all the time.
All the time.
Like two wolves will fight to the death over a carcass or a territory. But that is purely winner-takes-all biology. It's about resources and caloric intake.
Yes.
Lin argues that when humans introduced the concept of faith, when they started fighting not just to survive, but because they believed a divine force would ensure justice prevailed, that pursuit of right versus wrong is what separated us from the animal kingdom.
Lin views faith as the mechanism that elevated conflict from pure biology to a pursuit of cosmic justice.
That's a really powerful idea.
It is. It programmed human cognition to expect the universe to be fundamentally fair. But as we transition into his three categories of modern conflicts, we see how this evolutionary leap in cognition eventually creates a devastating logical trap.
Right. Let's dive into that trap with category 1, which is conflicts between different religious groups. When gods collide.
Yeah.
Because if the judicial duel programmed us to expect cosmic justice, what happens when two different versions of cosmic justice walk into the same room? Lin points out a massive logical glitch here.
A huge one.
If Group A believes their god is the ultimate creator of everything, then logically, Group A must believe that Group B's god is entirely false.
It's the paradox of multiple creators. In any unified logical system, you simply cannot have two ultimate, mutually exclusive creators of the universe.
You just can't.
So when these two faith groups clash, they're both claiming divine, absolute authority over what constitutes justice. But because their foundational premises cancel each other out, the logic completely fails.
The vocabulary of one group literally cannot process the vocabulary of the other. There's no shared framework for resolution.
Not at all.
So it's like a computer encountering a fatal error. The high-level operating system, the complex human pursuit of divine justice crashes because it can't resolve two ultimate creators.
That's exactly it.
So what happens then? Does the system just shut down?
According to Lin, it doesn't shut down. It undergoes what he calls a downgrade.
Hit downgrade.
Yeah. Because the higher-level pursuit of divine justice has hit a logical dead end, the behavior downgrades right back into the biological realm. It reverts to the animalistic, winner-takes-all blood sport.
Wow.
The moral framework collapses entirely, and the conflict just becomes about which group can physically overpower the other. And the tragic irony is that they were still using the lofty language of faith.
But they are acting entirely on the logic of wolves.
Exactly.
And Lin doesn't hold back on who he blames for this historical mess either. I mean, he points the finger directly at human institutions.
He really does.
He argues that historically, churches and religious factions were so hungry for earthly power that they artificially fractured the concept of a single God. They literally sliced up the divine to maintain control over their specific followers and territory.
Yeah, and in Lin's view, this fracturing is the ultimate offense to the concept of the divine. By dividing the creator for political and social power, humanity basically guaranteed these endless, unsolvable cognitive conflicts.
He does offer a solution to this specific category, but man, it is a monumental ask.
Oh, it's massive.
He says the only way to fix this logical glitch is for the world to universally recognize that there's only one creator in nature. Basically, humanity has to universally patch the software bug that the ancient power grabs introduced.
Right. And until that happens, religious conflicts will always inevitably downgrade into animalistic violence. It requires a global unification of the very concept of existence.
Which is probably not happening tomorrow.
Definitely not, which leads us to explore what happens when that logical mismatch becomes even more extreme.
Okay, bringing us to category 2.
Yes, conflicts between faith groups and non-faith groups. This is arguably the most complex and asymmetrical dynamic in Lin's entire framework.
The logical collapse in category 1 makes sense to me, but what happens when one side doesn't even play the divine logic game at all?
Well, Lin essentially says that faith groups, and he specifically calls out modern Europe and the U.S. here, are still unconsciously carrying around the psychological baggage of that ancient judicial duel.
Oh, so deep in their cultural DNA, faith-based societies still believe that if they are morally just, the universe will somehow reflect that in the outcome.
Precisely. They equate fairness with ultimate victory. But non-faith groups do not have that cognitive software installed.
They just don't run that program.
Nope. Non-faith groups operate strictly on the animalistic mindset. If we win, it simply means we are the strongest. It has absolutely nothing to do with proving cosmic justice.
Wait, I need to pause here because the implications of this are just massive. Lin is essentially saying that faith groups are walking into a brutal street fight expecting a highly regulated, noble fencing match.
That asymmetry is the entire core of Category 2. The faith group is standing there, adhering to international norms, waiting for the global referee to call a penalty, trusting that the rules of fairness will ultimately protect them.
And the non-faith group.
The non-faith group is just picking up a brick.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The non-faith group is not bound by the agonizing moral calculations of right and wrong. They are bound only by the calculus of victory and defeat.
Because of this mismatch, Lin issues a really dire warning to those faith-based societies. And his proposed solution is, well, it's deeply uncomfortable.
It is.
He argues that to survive this specific type of conflict, faith groups must actively lower their cognitive dimension.
Right.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Are we talking about a modern nation just ripping up the Geneva Conventions, abandoning international law entirely just to match a ruthless opponent?
Lin is suggesting something profoundly challenging. He's warning that because non-faith groups just want to win at all costs, faith groups are operating at a massive existential disadvantage.
Right.
So to lower their cognitive dimension means they have to temporarily suspend their higher-level pursuit of cosmic justice and just adopt the non-faith group's ruthless survival-based logic.
They literally have to drop the fencing foil and pick up a brick of their own.
They do. Lin warns that if they refuse to do this, if they cling to the illusion that their opponent secretly cares about objective right and wrong, they risk losing their existing civilization entirely.
Wow.
They will be consistently outmaneuvered by a group playing a much simpler, much more brutal game. The real tragedy here is that the faith group's greatest evolutionary achievement, which is their moral framework, becomes their fatal strategic vulnerability.
That is incredibly heavy. Let's just let the weight of that sink in for a second.
Yeah.
It basically dictates that morality is a liability when you are fighting someone who doesn't even have the vocabulary for it.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the absolute bottom of Lin's spectrum. Category 3. Conflicts between two non-faith groups.
Yeah, if Category 2 was a street fight against a fencer, Category 3 is just two wolves in the woods.
Right.
There's no illusion of the judicial duel here. Neither side is looking up at the sky, waiting for a higher power to declare a winner. It is pure, unadulterated empire building.
To really grasp this, we need to look at Lin's vivid imagery from the text. He uses the analogy of a pasture.
Right.
To these non-faith groups, territory and citizens are nothing more than grass and sheep. The conflict between these massive groups is entirely about management rights over the herd.
It's so cold. That metaphor reduces all of human history, culture, and individual lives to pure caloric value and resource management.
But Lin cautions his readers to be very careful here, doesn't he? Because these groups will absolutely still use the word justice.
Oh, they love that word.
You will hear their leaders stand at podiums and speak passionately about what is right and fair for their people.
But if they don't believe in a higher moral order, what do they actually mean when they say justice?
They mean justice regarding who gets to own the resources.
Exactly. It is a rhetorical weapon, not a moral compass. When they use the vocabulary of morality, it is entirely hollowed out. The whole system relies fundamentally on fear, force, and control, dressed up in the stolen language of human civilization.
So if you're listening to this and wondering why international peace summits often feel like nothing ever gets done, Lin's framework provides a terrifyingly clear answer.
It does.
When you see global leaders from these specific types of non-faith groups engaged in power struggles, when you see them signing elaborate treaties or making sweeping speeches about historical rights, Lin says it is a total illusion.
It's pure theater.
Yeah.
Going back to his very first premise regarding the failure of language,
Yeah.
in this third category, words and contracts are completely useless.
Right.
You cannot bind an animalistic pursuit of power with a piece of paper. It is a game played exclusively by the ruling class, and it is completely irrelevant to the ordinary people, the sheep, living on that land. The sheep do not benefit from the wolves signing a non-aggression pact.
They simply get a new manager.
Exactly.
It radically reframes how you process the evening news. You stop listening to the words the diplomats are saying. You start looking at which of the three games they're actually playing.
Yeah. Are they fighting over the definition of God? Are they exploiting a moral blind spot? Or are they just arguing over who owns the pasture?
It strips away the diplomatic veneer entirely. But you know what's so striking about Lin's work is not just the massive, sweeping scale of his geopolitical theories, it's actually how he chooses to end source 346-4.
Yes.
For an author writing about the fundamental laws of human civilization and cognition, he concludes with a shocking amount of humility.
I'm so glad you brought that up,
Yeah.
because it completely changes the tone of the piece. After breaking down the entirety of human conflict and tracing it back to the failure of vocabulary, Lin begs his readers not to blindly believe his words.
He literally cautions his own friends and readers against taking what he says as absolute truth.
He does. It serves as this profound meditation on the metaphysics of communication. Lin acknowledges a fundamental, almost tragic limitation of human existence. He writes that the exact moment his ideas leave his brain and enter someone else's cognitive system, the meaning inherently mutates.
He is basically admitting that the absolute root cause of all conflict language failure applies directly to his own writing about conflict.
Yep.
He is using a flawed tool to describe the flaws of the tool.
He accepts that he cannot confirm if any reader truly understands his original intent. He assumes that you, the reader, will distort his ideas simply by filtering them through your own life experiences, your own limited vocabulary, and your own logic.
Yet, despite knowing that perfect communication is impossible, he writes anyway, he states that he still hopes to resonate with the reader's soul, even if the intellectual transmission is inherently flawed.
It's a beautiful sentiment, but it also leaves you with a slightly haunting realization about how isolated we all might be.
It really does.
And this raises an important question, one we want to leave you with today. If Lin is right, if the absolute root cause of all human conflict stems from the failure of language, and if he freely admits that even his own precise writing about conflict will inevitably be misunderstood by the time it reaches your brain,
Yeah.
are our minds so fundamentally isolated from one another that objective justice is just an illusion? Is what we call truth just a temporary mirage created by the limits of our own vocabulary?
Wow, if we can't even agree on the rules of the game because our dictionaries don't match, then maybe we are all just fiercely arguing over a referee's call on a board that doesn't actually exist. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning the map, keep looking for the hidden gears, and we'll catch you next time.